My Muslim family pointed camera at my face. My father sat across from me, tears running down his cheeks, quiet, steady tears. Just read it, Layla. Just say the words. You don't have to mean them. Just protect your daughter. And then I put the script down. All I had to do was read them into the camera. I looked at the paper. I looked at words that would make everything go back to what it was. My marriage, my home, my daughter asleep just down the hall. My name is Layla. I was 29 years old when I sat in front of that camera. And what I did in that moment, what I couldn't...
Miss Layla. I was 29 years old when I sat in front of that camera. And what I did in that moment, what I couldn't do, changed every single thing about my life. Let me tell you how I got here. If stories about faith and what it costs, and what it gives back, resonate with you, stay with me. This one took everything I had to tell. I was not searching for Jesus. I want to be clear about that. I wasn't rebellious. I wasn't unhappy with Islam in any philosophical way. I was simply living the life I had been given, doing my best to live it correctly. I grew up in Cairo, in a neighborhood where faith wasn't something you chose. It was something you wore, like skin. My father worked for the government. My mother kept the home. We prayed. We fasted during Ramadan. We observed. We obeyed. I was a good student, then a good daughter, then a good wife. I married Ahmed when I was 23. It was arranged, as most marriages in my circle were. He was stable and responsible, and those things seemed like enough. We had a daughter, Nadia, when I was 24. She became the center of everything. I poured all the warmth I couldn't seem to find in my marriage directly into her. From the outside, my life looked right. I prayed 5 times a day. I wore hijab. I taught Nadia the prayers, the names of God, the proper way to hold her hands during Salah. There was nothing wrong with any of it. But somewhere underneath all that correctness, there was a silence I couldn't explain, a kind of hollow space that prayers seemed to echo around rather than fill. I didn't have a name for it. I just knew that after years of faithful observance, I expected to feel closer to God than I did. Instead, I felt like I was performing for a God who was always watching for mistakes, always weighing whether I had done enough. I told no one this. You don't say these things out loud. The woman who first made me question that silence was named Maria. She was elderly, 70s, maybe older, a Coptic Christian who lived 2 floors below us. I had barely spoken to her in 2 years of being her neighbor. We were polite. We nodded. She was kind, but she was from a different world. Then one evening, Nadia fell ill. It came on fast, a fever that spiked before I could reach the doctor, and Ahmed was traveling. I was alone, and I was frightened in that particular way only mothers understand. I was in the stairwell, trying to call Ahmed, when Maria appeared. She didn't ask questions. She didn't hesitate. She took one look at me and said, "Come. Come inside." She sat with me for 4 hours. She made tea. She pressed a cool cloth to Nadia's forehead. When Nadia finally fell asleep, Maria sat quietly beside me and said, "She'll be fine. And so will you." It was nothing, really. It was just kindness. But I found myself crying in her kitchen at midnight, and I couldn't explain why. It wasn't the fear for Nadia, the fever had broken. It was something about being cared for so completely and so freely, with no transaction attached to it. No expectation of return. Just presence. I walked home that night thinking about Maria's face. The peace in it. Not the resigned peace of someone who had given up on life, but something active and warm, like a fire in a room. She had it in a way I didn't. And she was a Christian woman who had lost her husband, lived alone, had no children nearby. What did she have that I didn't? I couldn't stop thinking about that question. If you've ever felt the emptiness beneath perfect religious performance, this testimony might resonate with you. Please share it with someone who needs hope. I told myself I was just being a good neighbor when I started visiting Maria for tea. I told myself it was nothing unusual, just two women in the same building, sharing a pot of chai in the afternoons. I ignored the small voice that reminded me what my community would say if they saw me walking into a Christian woman's apartment with any regularity. I ignored it because I needed to sit in that room again. I needed to be near whatever she carried. Maria never pushed. That was the thing I noticed first. She didn't invite me to church. She didn't lecture me about theology. She simply lived her faith out loud and without apology. Praying openly before meals, speaking about Jesus the way you speak about someone you know personally, not historically. She'd say things like, "I was talking to him this morning about you," and say it so naturally that I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. After a few weeks, I started asking questions. Careful ones, disguised as curiosity. What do Christians believe about prayer? How does forgiveness work in Christianity? Why do you say Jesus is God? Maria answered everything patiently and without pressure. She never made me feel like a project. She made me feel like a person. One afternoon she handed me a book wrapped in a plain brown cover. Inside was a Bible. "Take your time," she said. "No hurry." I hid it in my closet under a stack of old pharmacy textbooks. I read it at night after Ahmed fell asleep, or in the bathroom with the door locked, the light above the mirror humming softly. I felt like a woman doing something shameful, and I also felt strangely alive. The Gospels undid me slowly, the way water works on stone. It wasn't one moment. It was the accumulation of moments, reading how Jesus spoke to women, looked at them, treated them as people with dignity and interior lives. Reading the Sermon on the Mount and feeling like someone had switched on a light in a room I'd been sitting in darkness for years. Reading about grace. Not as a reward for performance, but as a gift already given, and feeling something break open inside me. I kept coming back to one sentence. "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest." I was weary. I had been weary for years. And I had never once been invited to rest. Then the dream started. 3 times over 2 months, I dreamed of a figure standing in a field of white light, saying my name. Not commanding me. Just calling. The way you call someone you've been waiting for. In the third dream, I saw a cross in the background, and the figure turned, and I didn't see a face, I just felt something I can only describe as being fully known and completely loved at the same time. I woke from that dream at 2 in the morning and went to the kitchen. I stood at the sink with the water running and I said, out loud, barely above a whisper, "If you are who Maria says you are, if you are real, I believe you. I want to belong to you." There was no thunder. No vision. Just quiet. But it was a different quiet than the hollow echo I'd lived with for years. This quiet had weight. It had warmth. It felt inhabited. I went back to bed and slept better than I had in years. I told no one. I knew the cost of telling anyone. I kept attending the mosque, kept performing my prayers, kept teaching Nadia her Islamic lessons. And inside, quietly, I was someone completely different from the woman everyone thought they knew. I thought I could keep those two lives separate forever. I was wrong. I'd found Jesus. But I had no idea my secret was about to be exposed in the worst possible way. Nadia was 5. She was curious and bright and she repeated everything. I should have been more careful. I knew that. But children don't understand what's dangerous and what isn't. To her, Maria was just Auntie Maria, the kind old woman downstairs who gave her biscuits and told her stories. To her, Isa, the Arabic name for Jesus, was just a name she'd heard her mother say during visits downstairs. She mentioned it to Ahmed one evening at dinner. Something small, innocent. Mama talks to Auntie Maria about Isa a lot. Then, I saw a book with a cross on it in Mama's closet. I wasn't home when she said it. I was at work. Ahmed didn't ask me about it when I came home. He waited until I left for my shift the next morning. Then he searched the apartment. He found the Bible. He found the margins filled with my notes, my questions, my underlines, the verses I had circled in pencil. He read what I had written. He knew. I walked into my own home that evening and stopped in the doorway. Ahmed was sitting at the table. His father was there. 2 of his brothers. My own father, who had apparently been called already. And the local imam, a man I had known my whole life, sitting in my living room with his hands folded. The Bible was on the table between them like evidence at a trial. Ahmed's face was not angry in the way I expected. It was something more frightening than anger. It was the face of someone who has been deeply, personally humiliated and is trying very hard to contain it. "Sit down," he said. I sat. They gave me a chance to explain. I took it, because I have never been a person who lies easily. I told them about the loneliness. About Maria. About the questions I had been carrying for months. About the night in the kitchen and what I had felt when I prayed. I watched their faces as I spoke. My father put his head in his hands. Ahmed's jaw tightened. The imam listened with a stillness that was not peace but calculation. When I finished, no one was quiet for long. The imam spoke first. He quoted the relevant passages. He used the word ridda, apostasy. He spoke about it the way you speak about a disease, something to be contained, treated, eliminated before it spreads. Ahmed spoke next. He talked about the family name. About Nadia. About what this meant for all of them. My father spoke last. He looked at me with an expression I have never been able to fully erase from my memory, grief so complete it had gone past anger into something resembling mourning. "You have shamed us," he said. "You have shamed your daughter." They gave me until the following evening. Recant publicly, on camera, and everything would be addressed. I would be watched, monitored, counseled, but the marriage would continue. I would keep my daughter. Life would go on. Refuse, and Ahmed would file for divorce immediately. Under the laws governing their community, he would receive custody of Nadia. I would be permitted 1 supervised visit per month. My family would cut contact. The community would be notified of my status as murtad. "You have 24 hours, Ahmed said. He stood up and walked to the bedroom. I sat at that table for a long time after everyone left. The Bible was still there. No one had taken it. I don't know if that was an oversight or a kind of cruelty, leaving it as a reminder of what had cost me everything. They wanted me to deny Jesus on video. And I had less than 1 day to decide whether I could. By the next afternoon, the script had been written. 3 sentences. Ahmed's father had drafted them with the imam's guidance. Simple, direct, unambiguous. I was to state that I had made statements suggesting departure from Islam due to emotional confusion and mental instability. I was to affirm that I remained Muslim. I was to thank my family for their patience and guidance in bringing me back. The video would be shared with the extended family and key members of the community. It would serve as public proof that the matter had been resolved. If I complied convincingly, the incident would be managed, I'd be watched, certainly. My friendship with Maria would end permanently. My movements would be restricted. But I would remain Nadia's mother in her daily life. Ahmed's father would film it. My father sat beside me when they brought me into the room. He looked smaller than he had the night before, as if the grief had compressed something in him. He pressed the script into my hands. "Just read it," he said quietly. "Just say the words. You don't have to mean them. Just protect your daughter." I looked at the paper. The words blurred slightly. I thought about Nadia. Her laugh. The way she climbed into my bed on weekend mornings and pressed her cold feet against my legs. The smell of her hair after a bath. I thought about what it would mean to see her only once a month, through the guarded eyes of Ahmed's sister, with every word I spoke to her monitored for signs of influence. I thought about her growing up being told that her mother was sick, confused, lost. The argument inside me was not theological in that moment. It was entirely maternal. Maybe I could just say the words. Maybe the words were just sounds, and what I believed in my heart was between me and God. My father was right that I didn't have to mean it. Hadn't believers throughout history sometimes said things under duress that didn't reflect their true faith? Wasn't protecting your child a moral obligation above almost everything else? I thought of Peter. I had read about Peter in those late-night hours with the Bible hidden in my lap. Peter, who had walked with Jesus for 3 years, who had watched the miracles, who had said, "You are the Christ," and who, in a cold courtyard, when things went badly, had looked a servant girl in the eye and said, "I don't know the man." 3 times. And Jesus had looked at him. And Peter had wept. But Jesus had not abandoned Peter. He had come back for him on a beach, after the resurrection, and asked him 3 times, "Do you love me?" One question for each denial, as if he were reconstructing something that had broken. As if he were saying, "Even this, I can restore." If Peter had denied him under pressure and been forgiven, wouldn't Jesus understand if I did the same? To keep my daughter? But then another thought arrived, quieter and harder to dismiss. Jesus had also said, "Whoever denies me before men, I will also deny before my Father in heaven." Not as a threat. As a reality. As the honest description of what denial does, it severs. It sends a signal that goes in both directions. Ahmed's father positioned the camera. My father was still holding my hand. The room was very quiet. The camera was recording. The script was in my hands. And I had to choose between Jesus and my daughter. I looked into the lens. My hands were trembling. I could feel the paper shaking against my fingers. My father's grip on my hand tightened slightly, encouraging. Ahmed stood at the edge of the room with his arms crossed, watching. I opened my mouth. The words were right there. I had rehearsed them. 3 sentences. I knew exactly how to say them, steadily, convincingly, in a tone that would satisfy everyone in the room and bring this nightmare to an end. And nothing came out. I sat there with my mouth open and the silence stretched, and I felt, in that silence, something I can only describe as a hand on my chest. Not physical. Not supernatural in any dramatic sense. Just presence. The same presence I had felt in my kitchen at 2 in the morning, the night I had whispered a prayer I didn't know how to pray. I thought of the words I had underlined months ago, "What does it profit a man to gain the whole world and lose his soul?" My whole world in that moment was a 5-year-old girl down the hallway who smelled like shampoo and laughed at her own jokes. And I understood, in that terrible clarity that comes only under the most extreme pressure, that I could not do it. Not because I was brave. I was not brave. My hands were still shaking. I was terrified. But I could not deny the one who had found me in a dark kitchen when I was empty. Could not look into a camera and say he was not Lord, that he was not real, that what I had experienced was confusion. Because it wasn't confusion. It was the clearest thing I had ever known. I set the script down on the table. Ahmed's father, who had one eye on the viewfinder, looked up. My father said, "Layla." I looked directly into the camera. "I cannot deny Jesus Christ." My voice was quiet. It was not heroic. It was the voice of someone who is very frightened and very certain at the same time. He is Lord. He died for my sins and rose again. I believe he is the Son of God. I paused. I'm sorry for the pain this causes my family. I love you. But I will not, deny him. The room erupted. Ahmed crossed the floor in 2 steps and reached for the camera, but his father had already pulled it back instinctively, the recording still running. There was shouting. My father stood up and then sat back down. Ahmed's brother said something I won't repeat. The imam's voice rose above everyone else's, firm and final. My father did not shout. He looked at me for a long moment with an expression I have carried with me every day since. Then he said, "You are dead to this family." Ahmed's divorce filing began that evening. I was asked to leave the apartment within 48 hours. Custody proceedings started before the week was out. I had chosen Jesus over everything. Now I had to face the cost. I want to be careful here. I don't want to describe what followed in a way that sounds like the narration of someone who has processed it cleanly and moved on. I haven't fully moved on. There are days I still haven't. Within 1 week I had lost my home, my marriage, my position at the pharmacy where I had worked for 4 years, and any regular access to my daughter. The community leadership was notified. The word murtad, apostate, followed me. Former friends crossed the street when they saw me coming. I received messages I won't describe in detail. Maria and the small Coptic church she attended took me in. They gave me a room, meals, and the kind of community I had not known was possible, people who had also paid high prices for their faith and still chose joy over bitterness. I was baptized a few weeks later in a quiet ceremony, surrounded by believers who held my hands and prayed over me in whispers, because even the baptism had to be done carefully. But none of it, not the homelessness, not the job loss, not the threats, hurt like the custody arrangement. 1 supervised visit per month. 1 hour. In a neutral location. Ahmed's sister sitting 3 feet away monitoring every word I said to my own daughter. Nadia had been told that her mother was sick. That I had experienced some kind of mental episode and needed prayer to find my way back to Allah. The first time I saw her after everything happened, she looked at me with a child's uncomplicated concern and asked if I felt better. I held it together until I was outside. Then I sat on a curb 2 blocks away and wept in a way I hadn't wept since before I was an adult. I questioned everything in those months. Not Jesus. I never doubted that he was real, that he had found me, that the encounter in my kitchen had been true. But I questioned myself. Had there been another way? Could I have been wiser, more patient, found some longer path that preserved my access to Nadia while I still sought faith? Was my confession in front of that camera an act of integrity or an act of pride dressed up as integrity? I prayed about it constantly. Not with beautiful words. With fragments. With crying. With the kind of prayer that has no form because the grief has taken all the form out of you. And in those dark moments, something would find me. Not always immediately. Sometimes it came hours later, or the next morning, in a line of scripture I had read before but suddenly heard differently. Sometimes it came through Maria's voice, her quiet certainty that Jesus was present and working even when the evidence was entirely against it. She would remind me that Jesus had also been separated from relationship, on the cross, in the moment he cried out, my God, why have you forsaken me?" and that he had gone into that darkness willingly, for love of people who didn't yet know him. He knew what it was to lose everything in the hope of someone else's eventual freedom. I held on to that. I'd lost my daughter. But Jesus was about to show me he hadn't forgotten her. 18 months have passed since the day I sat in front of that camera. I'm telling you this from a place I couldn't have imagined then, not because everything has been fixed or restored, but because I've learned that healing and grief can exist in the same space, and that hope doesn't require certainty about outcomes to be real. I now work quietly with a ministry that serves women in situations similar to mine. Women who have come to faith in Jesus in communities where that faith carries a high relational cost. I use my testimony, including that video, the one Ahmed's family made as evidence of my apostasy, as part of that work. The thing they created to shame me became something else entirely. They wanted it to show my failure. Instead, it shows a woman unable to deny what she believed even under the greatest possible pressure. I find something gently ironic in that. I think Jesus might too. Maria was diagnosed with cancer 8 months ago. I was with her near the end. I held her hand in that small apartment where I had first drunk tea and begun to ask questions I couldn't stop asking. She was not afraid. That was what I noticed most. She was not performing peace for my benefit. She genuinely did not seem to be afraid. She slipped away quietly, and the expression on her face was the same expression she had carried her whole life, that of a woman who knows exactly where she is going. Her funeral was small. I stood at the back. And then someone appeared who I had not expected to see there. Ahmed's sister. The woman who had spent 18 months supervising my monthly visits with Nadia, watching my every word, reporting back. She pulled me aside after the service. She was nervous, I could see it in the way she held her handbag with both hands. "I've been watching you," she said quietly. "For 18 months. You lost everything. And you have peace. I don't understand it. I want to understand it." She paused. "Can you tell me about Jesus?" I stood on that pavement outside Maria's church and I thought about how strange God is, how he works in the directions we never think to look. I told her yes. We meet now, quietly and carefully. She asks questions. I answer them as honestly as I can. I don't know where it will lead. I don't know what it will cost her, or what it might eventually mean for my access to Nadia. I don't make promises I can't keep about how the story ends. But I've stopped needing to know the ending. They forced me to deny Jesus on camera. I couldn't do it. That confession cost me my marriage. It cost me living with my daughter every day. It cost me my family, my community, my job, the life I had spent 29 years building. Was it worth it? I used to flinch at that question, because asking whether something is worth it implies a kind of transaction. As if faith is a trade you make for benefits you can measure. But I've come to understand it differently. Jesus said that whoever loses their life for his sake will find it. I lost my life. The life I had performed for years, the obedient daughter, the dutiful wife, the faithful Muslim who prayed 5 times a day and still felt hollow. I lost all of it. What I found was harder to describe but impossible to deny. I found the God who had been looking for me before I had any idea I was lost. I found grace that doesn't keep a record of performance. I found a community of broken people who love each other better than any perfect community I've ever known. I found a self that is no longer running from a silence she couldn't name. And I found, in the most unexpected way, a thread of hope regarding my daughter. Not a guarantee. Just a thread. The woman who once guarded against my influence is now asking me about Jesus. The same Jesus who pursued me is. I believe this with everything I have, pursuing Nadia. I'm trusting him with her. Because if he found me in a locked bathroom with a hidden Bible and a hollow heart, I think he can find a little girl being raised to pray in a different direction. He found me. He'll find her. That's not triumphalism. That's just the only hope I have left. And it turns out hope, real hope, the kind that has roots, is enough to live on. My name is Layla. And that is my testimony. For anyone facing an impossible choice, between what the world demands and what your conscience knows to be true, I don't have easy answers. But I know the one who is faithful when everything else falls away. If that resonates with something in you, I hope you'll seek him. Whatever it costs. He is worth it.